Very good. Namaste. Can everyone hear me?
Namaste, Acharyaji. I think you're coming through just great.
Very good. Very good. Oh, it's wonderful to be with you again. How's everyone doing?
I'm doing great. I think everyone else is as well. And it's always a pleasure to do these, so I'm very happy.
Absolutely. It's definitely my pleasure as well. And I know we have a certain specific theme today. We're going to be talking about authentic Sanatana Dharma versus what often is called Neo-Hinduism, that is, many of the more modern, let's say, ideas that have crept into Hinduism as a whole, but then various contemporary Vedic and Hindu organizations, movements, etc. So is that our general theme for today?
Absolutely, on those topics, on that general topic. We had no shortage of questions. We just had to try to cover as much ground in as few words as we could with them.
Very good. Wonderful. Well, I am here at your disposal, and please feel free to ask your questions.
Excellent. So then I'll just jump right into them. The first one is actually more of a question, just a general question, which is, what are some of the most dangerous misconceptions today about Sanatana Dharma that you think need to be addressed?
All right. Well, this will require a 10-hour interview, probably. But no, I can certainly address a few of the more important ones. Probably one of the most important is the idea, generally speaking, of universalism that has indeed crept into, let's say, contemporary Hinduism. And in fact, before I even go into that, if you can give me about a minute to first define these terms that I'm going to be using repeatedly, which is important, actually. Of course, what we are practicing is indeed what is called Sanatana Dharma. And that is the actual authentic name of this Vedic path. And it's not the only one. It certainly is not the only one. There are several terms, Sanskrit terms, for this path. But Sanatana Dharma is certainly the most prevalent. It's the most ancient. It goes back literally to Rig Veda, etc. So there is, on the one hand, authentic Sanatana Dharma as it has been practiced since the beginning of time. Sanatana Dharma itself, of course, meaning the eternal natural way. But then, unfortunately, what we have seen in, let's say, contemporary Hinduism, what is often referred to as Neo-Hinduism. I refer to it as that, but I'm not the inventor of that term. It's actually an academic term, meaning the Hinduism that came about, let's say, in the early to mid, and then including the late 19th century, continuing into the late 19th century, when Hinduism interfaced with modernity. And Neo-Hinduism being essentially a less authentic version of Sanatana Dharma, in which the Vedic foundation was thrown somewhat off kilter due to the inclusion of modern, number one, but also Abrahamist ideas into Hinduism. Thus, what we have today, interestingly, when people often talk about Hinduism, and when individuals refer to this term, when they refer to this religion as Hinduism, etc., what we end up having are, sadly, a lot of misconceptions that really have nothing to do with the original tradition, which again is called Sanatana Dharma. Rather, a lot of these are relatively modern concoctions that have entered into the Vedic tradition and warped it, unfortunately. And that will become more clear, hopefully, as we continue with the interview. But with that as just a little bit of a preface, there are certainly several of these ideas that have come in that are tremendous misconceptions. Probably the greatest of these is indeed what I call radical universalism. As many people know, I wrote an actual book called Radical Universalism, trying to show the non-Vedic origins of this idea of universalism, which, as we know today, is almost synonymous with contemporary Hinduism. And let me again explain that term, what is meant by universalism or radical universalism. It is essentially this idea, the idea that basically it does not matter what it is that you believe, it doesn't matter what your religious path is, that all truths are true, that they can all be let's say, included under the greater umbrella of what is called Hinduism. It doesn't matter whether you are a Muslim with Muslim beliefs, whether you're Jewish, whether you're Christian, whether you are Buddhist, Sikh, Shinto, etc., etc. It doesn't even matter if you're an atheist and if you indeed deny the validity of the Vedas themselves. The idea of radical universalism is, regardless of your belief structure, you will end up ultimately having the same goal as individuals following Hinduism. So it's the idea that all religions are the same. It's the idea that all religions are equal, that they are the same, that while they differ somewhat in their approach, in their practices, truthfully, they all have the same goal in the end. This is radical universalism, to state it in a very small nutshell. Well, again, for many individuals who have encountered Hinduism, either by going to, sadly, many Hindu temples, or reading about Hinduism on such places as Wikipedia or different places on the internet, sadly, the impression that people will often have is that this is indeed Vedic. This idea of radical universalism. And the truth of the matter is, no. This is a concoction that came about in the early 1800s. I don't want to go very deeply into the history. As far as the history, again, if people read my book, Radical Universalism, I actually go very extensively into what are the actual historical and ideological origins of this idea of radical universalism, how it was brought specifically to India, and how it very slowly throughout the 19th century became a, let's say, foundational aspect of Neo-Hinduism, that is, New Hinduism, the way it's practiced today. But again, if you go back previous to the early 1800s, this idea that all religions are the same, it doesn't matter what you follow, we all end up at the top of the same mountain, regardless of what path you take to the top of the same mountain. This did not exist. This concept did not exist in the Vedic tradition among followers of Sanatana Dharma, again, previous to the early 1800s, the early 19th century. But the difficulty with this, of course, is that what has happened is that as a result of this truly debilitating and truly illogical concept that all religions are exactly the same, something no other religion teaches other than contemporary Hinduism, what has happened, of course, is that this has served to weaken Hinduism itself and to thus attack the very idea of identity as a follower of Sanatana Dharma. You see, if you say all religions are the same, then why call yourself Hindu? And this is the dilemma that many modern Hindus find themselves in, is that indeed, if you believe this is the case, well, all religions are the same. It doesn't matter what you follow. It doesn't matter what you believe. Allah is Krishna, Krishna is Shiva, Shiva is Yahweh, Yahweh is nothingness, etc., etc. Well, if you believe that this is the case and you consider yourself Hindu, then why do you even consider yourself Hindu? Why not just become Muslim? Why not just become Buddhist? Why not just become something else? Is it not the logical conclusion that, again, it doesn't matter? So thus the Vedic tradition itself loses its reason for being, its raison d'être. It loses its reason for being. So this is ideologically and philosophically one of the most debilitating and one of the most pernicious modern additions to Neo-Hinduism, to contemporary Hinduism, that has damaged the Vedic tradition as a whole tremendously. And yes, we need to make this very clear. It's not merely that this has damaged, let's say, contemporary Hinduism. It has damaged Sanatana Dharma as a tradition itself, because again, it has weakened the foundation of Sanatana Dharma philosophically. It has weakened it as far as its dignity, as far as identity and a reason to even identify with Sanatana Dharma, etc. This is a topic that, as you can imagine, I could talk about alone for 5 hours. Again, I wrote a book, an entire book on this topic. But this is certainly one of the biggest misconceptions. There are others. Another one is henotheism. Henotheism. For those who are listening or watching, please feel free to look up that term, henotheism. This is a term that was created by Max Mueller, who was a scholar in the late 19th, early 20th century, who studied world religions, philology. He studied the Vedas. He studied Hinduism as well. Of course, it was with the idea that being a radically committed Christian, he himself wrote in several letters to relatives of his that his goal was the destruction of Hinduism. And this is why he studied Hinduism. So, of course, we can't take anything really that Max Mueller said seriously. But he came up with this term, henotheism. And that is the idea that all of the gods are the same, all of the gods, goddesses within Hinduism, and you can basically pick and choose whichever one you want and worship that being. And again, like radical universalism, the idea is that you end up in the same place anyway, regardless of what being you worship and you focus your meditative awareness upon. So again, it was Max Mueller who came up with this term, henotheism, but sadly, unfortunately, many Hindu intellectuals at the time, again, late 19th century, early 20th century, took Max Mueller very seriously. Not having confidence in their own traditional scholarship, they felt that this person had found one of the keys to understanding Hinduism. So unfortunately, what we find is that today, over 100 years after Max Mueller, there are many Hindus, in fact I would say the majority of Hindus, who indeed take this idea seriously. Again, this idea that, oh, you can pick and choose whatever god you wish to have, god, goddess, etc. It doesn't matter if it's some localized tree spirit, it doesn't matter if it's a celestial being like Surya, it doesn't matter if it's a Gandharva, one of the lesser heavenly beings. It doesn't matter if it's Vishnu, Shiva, Brahma, etc. Pick whichever one you wish to worship and make that your God, and that is God. That is the absolute for you, and you will know the absolute. Well, of course, in even stating it, in stating the problem in this way, we can understand philosophically, A, what the philosophical problem is with this, plus the fact that, again, this is not taught in Sanatana Dharma. It doesn't matter how many contemporary Hindu temples you go to, or how many Hindu organizations you become affiliated with, or how many fraudulent Hindu so-called swamis or gurus will tell you this. It is not Vedic. This is an idea that, again, goes back not very far historically. It's quite modern, and this is not found in the Vedic scriptures, the actual epistemological source and foundation of our knowledge. This is not found in the Vedic scriptures. Rather, on the contrary, Krishna makes very clear in Bhagavad Gita that you go to that being who you worship. If you worship the Pitars, the ancestors, you go to the ancestors. If you worship the Devas, you go to the Devas. If you worship ghosts, you likewise will become a ghost. But Krishna says, if you worship me, you come unto me. If you worship God, then you will know God. This is what the Vedic scriptures actually teach. But again, very sadly, if you speak to many contemporary so-called Hindu leaders even, forget about lay people. Even if you go to a lot of Hindu leaders today and you ask them, oh, is this what quote-unquote Hinduism or the Vedic tradition teaches? That, oh, pick whatever god you want and it's the same. They'll say yes. Again, unknowingly, out of ignorance. But again, this is not what the Vedic scriptures actually teach. And I can go on probably with several dozen other unfortunate misconceptions like this that have crept into the Vedic tradition in the last roughly 150 years or so. But why don't I stop there for now and see if there are any questions, and maybe some more misconceptions will just naturally arise.
Yes, excellent. In traditional fashion, we answer multiple questions with that open-ended introduction. So I think I'll go on to this next one here. Many Orthodox Indian Sri Vaishnavas seem to claim that we shouldn't chant any Vedic mantra, including the Narayana mantra, without initiation. Could you shed light on this?
Yes, I certainly can shed light on this. Yes, as far as the Sri Vaishnava Sampradaya, there actually are two schools of thought, and I won't go into a lot of detail about these two schools of thought. One tends to be a little bit more rigid in their application of Vaishnavism, one tends to be a little bit less so. But the truth of the matter is the understanding of both is not 100%, let's say, accurate in accordance with both the scriptures and the acharyas. Let me just first state this, again, in a very upfront sort of way, and then go a little bit into depth. No, we have the ability to recite the names of God. These are the names of God, and God is not owned by anyone. So it doesn't matter, even if we're initiated, we certainly can still recite the name of God, meditate upon the name of God. It doesn't matter what our caste is. Sadly, some of these people even tend to be very caste conscious, and if you are not born in a Brahmana caste, then even then you can't receive initiation, etc. No, that's all silliness. Again, this is part of contemporary Neo-Hinduism that has nothing to do with the Vedic way. The Narayana mantra, in fact, the reason why any human being today even knows about this mantra is because the most important acharya in the Sri Vaishnava Sampradaya, the very same Sampradaya that these incorrect people belong to, the most important acharya was Ramanuja, and he revealed it to the entire world indiscriminately, regardless of people's caste, regardless of whether they were initiated or not. In fact, it's a very famous story. I won't tell the story now, but it's a very famous story of how he revealed this mantra to the entire world. So no, it is not necessary to either be in a certain caste or to receive initiation in order to recite the names of God, any sort of valid Vedic mantra in any way. However, it certainly is necessary if one wishes to proceed in one's sadhana in a systematic way to indeed take initiation. See, that's a different story. It's not a matter of, oh, if a person doesn't have initiation, that they are forbidden to to recite the names of God. No, that's silly. That's absolutely silly. Anyone can recite the name of God. Rather, it is a matter of, do you wish to recite the name of God in a manner that is going to be most conducive to you in your sadhana practice to actually make spiritual advancement? For that, you need initiation. That's the traditional understanding. That was the understanding of Ramanuja, etc. So again, this sort of rigidity is something that happened post-Ramanuja and is not a part of the original Sri Vaishnava Sampradaya. Actually, let me just go a little bit deeper because this is very important. If you look at the Sri Vaishnavism of the Alvars, of Sri Nata Muni, of Yamuna Acharya, of, again, Ramanuja, what you see is a very different Sri Vaishnavism as what exists today. Back then, with these original acharyas, yes, it was very fluid. Thus, we know, for example, that of the 12 Alvars, and the 12 Alvars are considered to be the most sacred people among Sri Vaishnavas. Among these Alvars, one of them was a woman, one of them was a Shudra, or at least, let's say, born in a Shudra family, etc. So, yes, even among the most important, let's say, revealers of the Sri Vaishnava tradition, caste didn't matter. Such rigidity did not exist. Rather, it is today, now that, again, this sort of Neo-Hinduism has crept in and rigidified everything in a very unfortunate way, that people say such things. But the original acharyas and the Alvars would disagree with them, as with the Vedic scriptures. So, does that answer that question?
Yes, absolutely. And it sort of seems like, just from the outside, that it seems like you have all of these, most of the time, Abrahamists or outright atheists coming and injecting these ideas into modern Neo-Hinduism, and then you have the same type of people in the academia using these as the biggest, reasons against the validity of Neo-Hinduism, such as, oh, it's a rigid, oppressive caste system where you're born into a caste and you can't do anything, oh, women aren't allowed to do anything, etc.?
Absolutely. It's very interesting. I mean, I don't know how much we want to go very deeply into the entire history of this, but it's very interesting. It's something that, I mean, for myself, with a PhD in languages and cultures of Asia and having studied this academically, but then on my own as well, it's fascinating how indeed, let's say, all of the demonic forces of modernity, both Abrahamists as well as atheistic, materialistic, Marxist, communists, etc., and especially in academia, yes, they have attacked traditional Sanatana Dharma in a variety of ways. And yes, it's kind of a pincer move. You're correct about that. I believe that's what you're saying. It's been kind of a pincer move. On the one hand, they themselves are the people who very often, especially under the British Raj, under the East India Company, etc., in so many ways, they are the ones who actually were responsible for rigidifying the caste system on the one hand. But then, of course, they will then criticize the tradition for being so rigid. So yes, you're correct about that. And that's just one of 100 examples of where, yes, Abrahamists, that is Christians, Jews, Muslims, as well as atheistic scholars, have, over the last 200 or so years, they have attempted to warp the Vedic tradition, but then criticize the very thing that they warped. Criticize the very same misconceptions and practices that they themselves introduced into the Vedic tradition. So it's kind of like a pincer move where they come from two directions in order to try to denigrate Sanatana Dharma, and they've done this for a very, very long time. First, it was with religious motivations. Again, many of the early scholars, so-called scholars in the 19th century, many of the British, French, German scholars, they were motivated by Christianity. They saw Sanatana Dharma, the Vedic tradition, as something that was a threat to Christianity, and they felt they had to destroy it. So they introduced many misconceptions and claimed that these were quote-unquote Hindu. But then afterwards, beginning especially in the 20th century, then you start to have Marxist professors, Marxist scholars, etc., so-called researchers, who also attacked the Vedic tradition using similar methods, but for a different motivation. It wasn't religiously motivated, rather it was ideologically motivated. These people were Marxists. They saw atheism as the natural successor to all religion, but they saw, interestingly, Sanatana Dharma as their greatest enemy. It's interesting, most people are not aware of this fact when it comes to Marxist atheism and their war against religion. Very often people will make the comment, and I've seen this repeatedly for 40 years, they'll make this comment repeatedly that, oh, it seems that the greatest religious enemy of Marxism has been Christianity. It seems to be that they attack Christianity the most, understanding that Christianity is the greatest enemy of Marxism. That actually is not the case. I would say that Christianity has been second most attacked. The truth of the matter is the Marxists have waged a war against Sanatana Dharma, the likes of which has been ferocious. And they've done this again for 100 years, roughly. And they truly see Sanatana Dharma as their greatest ideological enemy. And for good reason. For very good reason is that the case. Because, of course, yes, Sanatana Dharma, more so than any other path on earth, not only ideologically is the very opposite of materialistic, atheistic Marxism, but more than this, Sanatana Dharma represents everything that Marxists have been endeavoring to destroy for, again, over 100 years. What Sanatana Dharma represents is the ancient. What Sanatana Dharma represents is the ancient way that Marxism seeks to destroy and annihilate and erase from human history. Thus, interestingly, yes, Marxist scholars have attacked Sanatana Dharma dishonestly and viciously 400 years. So hopefully that gives a little bit of insight into that. I forget if I actually answered the question. I forget what the question was, but hopefully that shed a little
No, it was
bit light.
a side note of the pincer maneuver, and this is why one of the reasons I and so many others are so grateful for your authentic teaching method, because once you scratch the surface a little bit on any of these misconceptions, you can start to see the origin point, and there's a lot of information to be gleaned from that. But I should probably move on to the next question here, with your permission.
Absolutely, please.
When practicing japa meditation, is it forbidden to use the tulasi beads before initiation, or should one use neem beads instead if they are not initiated?
Yes, good, very good practical question, actually. Yes, the standard is that, truthfully, you only need to use japa mala when you are initiated. Now, at the same time, you use the word forbidden. It's not forbidden to use mala. It's not like it's a sin or something. It's just unnecessary. Thus, in, again, the orthodox way of doing things in the Vedic tradition, yes, you don't give a person japa mala, actual beads, unless they're initiated. And for a very practical reason. The reason why they even have the mala is to keep track of how many mantras they are reciting, because they have a certain vow. Once you receive initiation, you have a vow that you'll recite a certain number of mantras per day. That being the case, you have to have a way of keeping track of how many mantras you're saying. So that's why you even have the beads to begin with. So of course, before you're initiated, you don't really practically need to have beads. So yes, that's the standard tradition. You do not receive beads until you are actually initiated. At the same time, I tell people all the time, pretty much on a weekly basis, someone will ask me about this, and I'll tell them, oh, if you have beads now and you're using them, keep using them, that's fine. That's fine. It's good to get into a sadhana practice and, let's say, mindset, even before initiation. So if you already have beads, don't throw them away. If you find that it's helpful in your meditation, absolutely keep using them. But also understand that it's especially upon initiation that the beads become of importance, because of the vow that you take with initiation.
Yes, thank you very much for that. I get that question a lot too, and unfortunately I'm nowhere near qualified to answer it. So the next question is, in some Hindu and most Abrahamic worldviews, there are set out and well-defined karmic punishments in the hellish realms for crimes in this life. Generally, I have noticed these punishments don't take into account circumstance or context, but rather are laid out as, you stole this bread, so you get 25 years of prison, doesn't matter why you stole it. How does karmic punishment functionally differ from this in the authentic Dharmic worldview?
Yes, actually, let me tell you, I have actually seen this too. It's very interesting how, for example, there is a set of literature called the Dharma Shastras. I'm sure you're aware of this, like Manava Dharma Shastra, the Manusmriti is one of these, but there are actually many of them. There's a Vishnu Dharma Shastra, there are quite a few. And they also indeed tend to be laid out in a very, very black and white, very simplistic sort of way like this. The reason why this is the case is because, of course, these sorts of punishments are not really dealing karmically. These are law. You'll see that even when it comes to, let's say, modern day law, when it comes to common law, when it comes to Roman law, when it comes to laws that's practiced in America, yes, you tend to see the same thing. Oh, you've committed this crime, this is your punishment. And there might be a little bit of leeway, but not very much. That is very different from how things happen karmically. See, the truth of the matter is, when it comes to the hellish realms, what occurs as a form of punishment in the hellish realms are, in a way, an extension of Dharma Shastra. They are an extension of, let's say, the methodology of Dharma Shastra, very interestingly. However, when it comes to these punishments that we find in the hellish realms, they themselves are one manifestation of karma. They are not karma itself. In other words, as far as the, let's say, impersonal decision-making process that occurs as a result of this principle known as karma, that occurs before the punishment actually takes place. So that actually occurs before you then read about these various punishments that occur in the hellish realms. Does that make sense so far?
Yep, I believe that's very well laid out so far.
Okay, very good. So now, dealing with karma itself and the operative function of karma, that is where there is actually a lot of nuance that's taken into account. That's where, for example, motivation is taken into account. That's where circumstance is taken into account. And not to the point, of course, of the idea of moral relativism. Oh, there is no moral relativism. But it is a matter of, it is our, let's say, mode of consciousness in making ethical decisions at a specific time that then leads to karma. You see, so karma is really a manifestation of our consciousness at the time more than anything. That consciousness manifests ethically, either negatively or positively. That is a summation of karma. That's how karma actually works on the level of one's consciousness. And of course, by consciousness, we don't mean spiritual consciousness, but one's awareness at the time. All right. So that being the case, yes, it is at that early point that some nuance can be there. Therefore, person A can kill someone, person B can kill someone, but their karma will be different. Now, it's in that early stage that the nuance takes place. And how can you say their karma will be different? Well, person A is a soldier who is simply following their duty. Person B is a murderer who is just selfishly murdering someone in order to steal from them. The act seems the same, but this is where the nuance of actual karmic determination comes in. Now, as far as the punishment for, of course, negative karma, we always have to keep in mind there's positive karma as well. We always tend to focus on the negative. But when it comes to negative karma, the punishment is secondary. The punishment is the karma pala. That is the fruit of the karma. It's not the karma itself. Does that make sense?
Absolutely. This is very, very interesting so far.
So that's, yeah, in a nutshell, that's how it works. So interestingly, when we read, so for example, in the 5th canto of Srimad Bhagavatam, of course, we have these descriptions of the hellish realms. And there's a little section where indeed it goes into a little bit of detail where it describes, people who do, let's say, X evil activity, this is what will happen to them. Interestingly, again, these are they're punishments. So again, they're secondary to the actual karma. But also, you can see how these are an extension of the idea of punishment as found in the Dharma Shastras. You are being punished. And that being the case, there's a certain punishment that you will receive. However, what determines the punishment? What is it that determines that you will receive that exact punishment? That's the actual karma that takes place previously. That's the more subtle element of the karmic activity. So that's the explanation.
Just to make sure that I and others understand, what's the key differing point in the Dharma Shastra's dharmic law versus, say, Abrahamic codified letter of the law system?
There isn't much difference, interestingly. You'll see, in fact, throughout the ancient, and this may come as a surprise to people because people know my view on Abrahamism versus Dharma. Correct? People know that, I see a vast distinction between the two. Interestingly, however, even with Abrahamism, the further back you go, this is true for everything, and this is even true for Abrahamism, the further back you go, let's say, the somewhat closer to Vedic things were, until, of course, you get to pre-Abrahamic. See, many of the laws of even the Abrahamic tradition were pre-Abrahamic. They come from Genesis. They come from an era before even Abraham. They're, in some cases, Noahide, what are called Noahide, that is Noahide laws, the laws of Noah. In some cases, they go back even before him. So, interestingly, when you look at the most ancient layer of law, whether it is Sumerian law, whether it is Mesopotamian, whether it is Egyptian, whether it is, yes, even, let's say, Genesis law, again, Noahide law, and then when you look at the Dharma Shastras, you see that let's say, many of the themes are very similar. Many of the themes are very similar. This is why when you look at many ancient codified law systems, yes, they seem to be somewhat similar. They have exact punishments for exact crimes, etc. Again, it's because these are meant to be extremely practical. There's nothing really overtly, let's say, spiritual about this kind of common law, where, okay, a person steals this is his punishment. This is more civil than anything. Of course, the foundation is always spiritual. The foundation is always that it must be in accordance with the Vedic worldview, let's say. But at the same time, we're talking about civic law. We're talking about crime and punishment. So this is why when you go back to truly ancient times, and again, I'm talking about way before Abraham, but again, you find this even in the Middle East as well as in the Vedic system. Yes, you see a lot of the same, let's say, mood and mentality and spirit in all the codified law systems of the ancient world.
That makes very good sense. But I am going to make a decision here to stay on this topic just for a second, with your permission.
Absolutely.
Since I seem to have some follow-up questions. So I'm just trying to word this off the top of my head here to try to capture what we're thinking. When you said that karma, I'm not gonna properly word that. I'm sort of trying to get across. So when you do something, the positive and negative reaction is the fruit of karma. But let's say, for example, I'm trying to come up with an exact example here. Like, let's say if you do some illicit activity, the Dharma Shastras say that your punishment will be you embrace a hot iron dummy or something like that. Excuse my just random example here. When you run into Yamaraja, is that like you do this, that is going to happen to you, or you do this, something else is going to happen to you necessarily, depending on the mode of your consciousness at that time of the ethical decision?
All right, let me see if this answers it. There is the moment of the doing, and then there is the fruit of the doing. So they are two different things. So, for example, the very word karma itself, we know, of course, that the word karma means action. It means work. It means to do. It means doing. Of kr, meaning it's a verb meaning, again, to do, to perform, to act, etc. So with even the very word itself, what the actual, let's say, metaphysical process of karma is referring to is not the punishment, but what is occurring at the actual time of the, let's say, action with ethical content to it. So in other words, all right, right now I am going to make an ethical decision, and then I'm going to act upon that. So I have the ability to kill this person or to do the opposite, to help them somehow. Here's a homeless person. I can kill the homeless person or I can give food to the homeless person. I make a decision and then I act upon it. An ethical decision. See, it always has to be an ethical decision, because there's a difference between action generally versus action that has ethical content to it. So it's only when we do action that has ethical content to it that then karma, in this metaphysical sense, comes into play. Okay, does that make sense so far?
Yeah, absolutely.
All right, now going back to this example. So here's a homeless person, and I'm some random person, and I need to make a decision. I want to be evil and kill this person, or I want to be good and give the person some nice food. Something like that. Now, once I make that decision and act upon it, let's say, sticking with the negative, I decide, oh, I'm going to kill this person for no reason, just to be an evil person, and I go ahead and I kill the person. Now, in accordance with the action that is also concordant with the mindset that I have at the time, that is what is actually going to be the factor producing the karma. Now, that is its own category called karma itself. What comes after as the reaction, as the karma pala, the fruit of my action, that is punishment. That's different. There's a difference between the two. It's similar to this. Just looking at modern times. Let's say there's a person who they decide to murder someone, and then 5 years later, well, this being America and everything taking forever, 20 years later, they're executed. The two are not the same. One led to the other, certainly. The person in an ideal circumstance would not be executed had they not murdered. But you can't say they're the same. You can't say that, oh, at the time of the execution, that person being executed is murdering someone right then. No, they did it 20 years earlier. But there's not one without the other. You see, so there's that distinction of the moment that a person engages in an action as a result of making a free will decision to do something with ethical content, that is to either help or harm someone, and that's when karma then comes into play metaphysically. There's that versus the time at some point in the future where there will be the result. Again, either good or bad. Either I did something evil and then in the future I will be punished, or I did something good and in the future I'll get some sort of reward. There's a distinction between the two, between karma per se, karma itself, versus karma pala, the fruit of karma, the result of karma. So does that make it any clearer?
Absolutely, and thanks for bearing with me on that off the cuff. I don't want to dwell on this too much, but I think what I was trying to convey, which you answered mostly there, was that a lot of people seem to have a fear of the Abrahamic or other types of modern Hindu gods or God monotheistically. They do something at some time when they're, say, 18 years old and they don't know any better, allegedly, and then they have this idea that, oh no, now I know better. And, oh no, I smoked weed when I shouldn't have, or I drank when I shouldn't have. Oh no, I'm going to be punished now and I'm going to have to do 70 years of hard labor, etc.
Yeah. Let me make a radical, what's for some people will be a radical statement, yet which is absolutely true. Nonetheless, it's not radical, but it will sound this way because maybe no one has heard it stated this way. Karma is our friend. Karma is not an enemy. You see, again, this is a more Abrahamic idea of literal punishment, that I made a mistake at some point. Yes, when I was 18, maybe I did something I shouldn't have, just out of ignorance and innocence, and I just didn't know any better. I really grew up, in a bad environment. My parents were not good guides, etc. Oh, but now, despite the fact that now, since then, for the last 10 years, I've been leading a wonderful spiritual life and been giving and good and virtuous. Oh, I still have this invisible spear from space hurtling toward my head that will hit me at any time. And yeah, it's unfortunate that people tend to see karma in this very negative sort of way. And this is Abrahamic. This is an Abrahamic mindset, this idea of inevitable and merciless punishment coming to me from an arbitrary, capricious God. Yeah, that's Abrahamic. That's not the Vedic way of even viewing karma. Karma is a manifestation of our own decisions, and the truth of the matter is everything is taken into account. Karma itself being a subtle principle, the subtleties of our decisions also are taken into account as well. So this is something that is very, very important for us to understand. That's the first thing. The second thing is we should see karma as our friend. My guru, B.R. Sridhar Swami, used to say this all the time, that we should see our environment and things that happen to us, both good and bad, not as enemies, but as almost friends, as occurrences that are occurring to help us grow, to help us learn, to help us to reform ourselves. So even if we do have bad karma, let's say something terrible happens, we're in a car accident and, we have to be on crutches for like 3 months or something like that and have some pain. Rather than seeing this in a fatalistic sort of way, I must have done something horrible, I'm a horrible person. No, use that pain to grow. Even if you don't know what the actual cause of it was. I mean, it may have been 5 lifetimes ago. We don't know why that happened necessarily, but it doesn't matter. Let's use that pain to grow. Let's use the experience to grow. Let's use that experience to, let's say, for example, to have more compassion toward others. So if we see someone else on crutches, if we see someone else suffering, we'll have more compassion for them, etc. So let's see karma as our friend, not some vicious enemy that's out there hiding in the shadows to leap upon us at any moment. Yeah, so this is what's wonderful about the Vedic worldview and what makes it different from Abrahamism. In Abrahamism, in Judaism, in, let's say, mainstream Christianity, institutionalized Abrahamic Christianity, in Islam, the idea of God is that, yes, God is a punisher. The idea in Abrahamism is that God is a punisher. Well, that's not our idea. The idea in Sanatana Dharma is that God is not here to punish us. God loves us. God is love, and we are meant to love God. And as far as karma, we caused it. And again, we should see it in an almost positive way. Allow this karma. We should almost pray to God. Oh, I've had something bad happen to me. God, please allow this terrible thing that's happened to be something that will teach me and help me to grow and to love you more. So that's how we approach karma, is in a very positive sort of way.
That's absolutely beautiful. And not just the invisible spirit from space part. Thank you for that, by the way.
Yeah, my pleasure.
So I should probably move on before I get fired for dwelling on karma for too long. The next question was regarding the regulative principles and common misconceptions we see with them. What specifically constitutes gambling in regard to the four regulative principles? Is it purely the idea of obtaining something for nothing, which encourages material lust?
Oh, no. I mean, not literally gaining something for nothing, because then you couldn't receive gifts. There are many things that come our way where we didn't really seemingly earn them. I mean, talk about good karma, then you couldn't accept any good karma. So no, it wouldn't be that broad a definition. Rather, the way I have always interpreted the idea of gambling has been in a literal sense. That is, engaging in gambling enterprises, that is, games of chance, or even if there's some skill involved, but where the idea is that you are wagering wealth that you potentially could lose or you could gain more. So just in a very simple way. I mean, that's how I've always understood gambling to mean. Of course, Prabhupada also has mentioned the idea of gambling as speculation as well. Yes, I would agree with that as well. Speculation, let's say it in a very egotistical sort of sense, that is not wanting to accept authority, but rather the idea of knowing God through one's subjective speculation, that really is a gamble in a way. But then speculation also meaning in the economic sense as well. So in some ways, one could say that even usury, and I'm not talking about simply from the perspective of the person loaning out money, but also from the perspective of the person taking the money, usury is a form of gambling. Because indeed, you are receiving money that you have not earned, really, in order to then do whatever you wish with the idea of hopefully paying it back, but sometimes you can't. It is a form of gambling when you think about it in those terms. Usury, and again, not just from the perspective of the person giving out the loan, but from the perspective of the person taking the loan. So I would include usury under the rubric of gambling as well.
Yes, and that's very unfortunate because, as you will probably well know, economically, in a lot of cities around the world, and this is just an economic statement, but people are sort of forced to, if you want to live a wholesome life, the easiest way, and sometimes someone could argue the only way is to go through these negative practices. Like, I know purchasing a house anywhere in a 100-mile radius where I am would be practically impossible for a young family without a lot of help or to take out a mortgage.
Mm-hmm, absolutely. And, we probably don't want to go very deeply into this, but of course we know that there are economic models, alternative economic models in which you can indeed borrow money without the idea of there being any interest. There's social credit. There are all sorts of schools of thought in which you do have the ability to, let's say, borrow money from a community chest or something like that, where there isn't any actual usury involved. I mean, there are alternatives. So yes, it is unfortunate that today, really, these alternatives, these economic alternatives to usury, only exist theoretically. But as far as actually doing these things, there aren't many actual institutions that do them. I mean, it's arguable. Maybe some Islamic banks follow some of these principles where you can loan money without usury. But Vedically speaking, yes, there are alternatives even in modern times throughout the 20th century. Again, without going too deeply into specifics and names or anything too controversial, we know that there are individuals who did attempt quite successfully to, at least in theory, come up with alternative practices of borrowing money, but without actual usury being involved at all. So, of course, that's what we need to do, is we need to engage in such practices, but more, we have to have institutions in the West that can engage in practices where, yes, people can borrow money, but without there being, again, that gambling aspect that, well, now that I've borrowed the money, it's not merely a matter of paying back what I actually borrowed, but now I have to pay back a certain interest, a certain percentage of interest that now is going to put me into perpetual debt, etc. So yes, I mean, again, this is something we can talk about very, very in depth, but hopefully that gave somewhat of an answer.
Yes, we should probably leave it there. With that, okay. So this brings us back to the opening in regards to radical universalists today claiming that you can use any name for God. It's all the same mountain. We're all just climbing up the same mountain. You can do whatever you'd like, and you'll get up to that same mountain top eventually, or maybe even the same time as everyone else. But they will frequently claim, and you very, very commonly see this in modern Neo-Hindu movements, including very recent ones, which had good intention starts, but maybe not so much anymore. They claim that, all of the names of God are the same. Allah, it's all the same, it doesn't matter. How can one tell today what an authentic name of God is?
All of the names of God are the same. It's a matter of is the specific name that you're using actually a name of God? So it's a subtle yet crucial distinction that is there. So in other words, God, that is in the ultimate sense, that in which nothing higher can be conceived, that which is the supreme being, the summum bonum, that being who is the possessor of an infinite number of auspicious attributes to an infinite degree, etc. In other words, what actually is God? That being, to state it philosophically, that being does indeed have multiple names. However, that does not mean that every name of every being is pointing to God. So I can't, just because God has many, many names doesn't mean that I can make up a name for God. Doesn't mean that I can call God Ralph or something like this. So there's a subtle yet crucial distinction that is there. So if you are indeed using one of the authentic, one of the revealed names of God, then you are pointing to God. So you can say Vishnu, you can say Narayana, you can say Govinda, you can say Krishna, you can say Rama, etc., etc., etc. In the Sri Vishnu Sahasranama, there are alone 1,000 names of God, and that's just the tip of the iceberg. There are many names for God, but all of these are indeed pointing to the Supreme Being. Now, with that understanding, this, however, doesn't mean that simply because someone claims that, I know a different name for God, this is pointing to God. So, thus, many names that people will claim are also pointing to God are actually pointing to lesser beings. So, I will be very, very, again, as always, blunt and direct and honest about this. So, for example, Allah. Allah is not one of the names of God. Allah is a localized divinity found in the Middle East who is not the same as Vishnu, who is not the same as Narayana, as Krishna, etc. The same thing with Yahweh. Yahweh is pointing to a localized divinity who indeed Abraham first encountered when he came from the city of Ur and he traveled westward into the Levant, what today is called Israel or Palestine. This is a localized divinity. So Yahweh, in modern times, they sometimes say Jehovah, which is actually inaccurate, but that's all right. This is not pointing to God. This is pointing to a localized divinity. Similarly, it gets back to what I was talking about before, how, for example, some people will say, oh, pick any god or goddess, even within the Vedic tradition, and claim that that is God. Well, that's not the case. You cannot take the name, for example, let's say of some Apsara, some lower Devi, who is a dancer of the gods, take that goddess's name and say, oh, this is pointing to God. No, it's pointing to that individual. You see, this is what it ultimately comes down to. And what I'm about to say now is more crucial than many people understand. So I hope that people will take what I'm about to say now very, very, very seriously. And that is this. We understand in dealing with fellow human beings that names mean something. If we're speaking to our mother, we don't call our mother Bob. We don't make up a name for our mother. We don't call our mother Ralph. If her name for some bizarre reason happens to be Ralph, that's different, but that's probably not the case. We call our mother, indeed, not even by her name. If we are respectful, we call her mother, mom, etc. If we have a wife and our wife has a name, we don't want to make the mistake of calling her by a different name. That would be disastrous. We understand that people have their names, and their names are sacred to them. Their names are indicators of that personality who is there. And, in the same way, if you have a name, your name is whatever. Again, your name is Bob, Robert, Jack, anything. How odd would it be if someone came up to you and started calling you by a different name and insisting, nope, this is your name? It would be very odd. We are respectful to each other in understanding that my name is my name. Don't call me something else. Your name is your name. I'm going to be respectful to you and call you by your name because your name indicates you. Well, interestingly, should we not also be just as respectful in dealing with God and the various gods and goddesses who are the servants of the Supreme Being? Therefore, when we are addressing a specific demigod or demigoddess, a Gandharva, an Apsara, a Rudra, etc., should we not address them by their name and not think that all names are interchangeable? Just like with human beings, all names are not interchangeable. You can't have a specific person and just call them anything you want and expect that they're going to accept that. That's disrespectful. In the same way, we can't do this to God either. God has his names. They are revealed in the Vedic scriptures. And they're not just any names that you, in your egotism and selfishness, choose to call him. Rather, they are his names. He's going to choose what he wishes to be addressed as. So this is the, of course, idea of personalism. If we are intelligent enough to respect each other as human beings and respect all of our names, and we call a person by their proper name, we don't make up a name for them, well, should we not do at least as much with God and respect God in the same way? So this is why, yes, we have to be very careful about this. God has many names, but not any name, and not a name that you just choose to assign to God, and more, other beings have their names. So there are devas, there are gods, lesser gods, who have their specific name. If you want to address the god of the sun, you say Surya. If you want to address the god of the moon, you say Chandra. If you want to address the goddess of learning and of knowledge and of Vedic civilization, you say Saraswati. Again, you don't say Ralph. That would be disrespectful. So it's important to understand this very seemingly very simple principle, and yet interestingly, a principle that in the darkness that has covered our intellect in the Kali Yuga, so many people have difficulty understanding. So yes, again, someone can claim, oh, this is the name of God, but it's actually referring to a specific lesser being. And among those names are Allah and Yahweh. These are not names of God. These are names of desert divinities from the Middle East. So if there is a deva that has a specific name, we have to respect that. If there is even an asura, a demonic being that has a specific name, we have to understand that is that being's name. It's not the name of God. Just like, again, if there are humans, they have a specific name. That's not a name of God. That's that person's name. Does that make sense?
Yes, absolutely. And as always, thank you so much for the bluntness, because it's very important, as you said, not to misunderstand these. And that goes not just for Abrahamic traditions, but I think, as you've said in the past, understanding that, yes, while Asatru is beautiful, a beautiful tradition that we would love to see bear fruit again, it's Odin is not Narayana.
No, Odin is not Narayana. Odin, however, is Indra. And Thor is not Narayana. Thor is Jayanta. And let me just say this. I haven't really stressed this a lot. I've mentioned it a few times, but I haven't really stressed it. But it's interesting how I've seen in the Asatru community, sadly, there's a lot of confusion about this. I've even seen that some people claim, for example, that Odin is Shiva. Absolute nonsense. I don't know where they got this. Whoever came up with that idea is someone who did not understand the Vedic tradition really in any way. No, it's quite clear that Odin is Indra. Thus, the son of Odin is the son of Indra. So Thor is Jayanta. That is the Sanskrit name for Thor, Jayanta, who is the son of Indra. Thor is not Shiva. Thor is not this person, that person, etc. Thor is Jayanta. But that's just as an aside. Again, we need to be accurate. We need to be accurate about these things, and we can't just make things up. Yeah, I don't know if you've seen this, but in some circles in the Asatru community, and this is very recent, I think just the last several years, some people claim that Odin is Shiva, and there is no connection between Odin and Shiva, unless you really, really want to stretch things to the point of truly warping meaning. No, we understand that Odin is the same as Zeus, is the same as Indra, etc. This is the king of heaven, the king of Svarga, the king of the heavenly realm, and that he has a son, and that son is a warrior. And in Norse paganism, he's known as Thor. In Sanskrit, he's known as Jayanta.
Yeah, that's exactly why I brought that note up, because I see that so often. Actually, the Odin is Shiva one is very, very common in the last few years. I think I have a general idea of where that came from, but not a very good idea.
Yeah, and again, it's very modern. I've seen that myself. I've been aware of Asatru longer than most people who follow Asatru have been alive. It's a very modern idea, and it's warped. It does not come from the Vedic tradition. But please, you go on.
Glad we could clear that up in a very precise and blunt way. With our last little bit of time, I wanted to ask more of a practical question, which has been addressed many different times in many different ways, but I think it bears repeating. Hopefully I'm right. What is the best way a devotee can go about making sure, no matter where they go in the material or subtle realm, they will always remember the lotus feet of Bhagavan Sri Krishna? Is it the study and practice of what's described in the Bhagavad Gita and the yoga system?
From a practice perspective, yes. Yes, definitely. Yes, it's a matter of following these practices, but with a very specific aim. And that is to develop bhakti. And while that might be obvious, let me explain why I'm explaining it in this way. This is actually how we remember Krishna regardless of where we find ourselves. It is by grabbing onto bhakti. It is by always having devotion to Krishna. Because we know, of course, Krishna explains in the Bhagavad Gita how any spiritual progress that we make stays with us. But this is the case with bhakti more so than anything. Bhakti is beyond even sukriti, even beyond doing pious and good spiritual acts. Bhakti is of the nature of Atman itself. Thus, how do we remember Krishna always? Yes, it's not just by being really good yogis. That will help. It's not just by being a really good meditator. That absolutely will help. But it's by very specifically grabbing on to bhakti, focusing on that devotion as much as possible, which itself is the fruit of yoga and meditation. So it is bhakti itself that keeps us always in not so much a mindset, let me say an awareness of Krishna. Krishna consciousness, Krishna Chaitanya, Krishna consciousness, an awareness of Krishna. It's that bhakti which is non-distinct from that awareness of Krishna in our Atmic state. Because bhakti itself is indeed a manifestation of Atman itself. It's something that spiritually is eternally with us. So that's why when we make progress on the spiritual path, that bhakti especially is something that we never lose, regardless of, even if we fall down from the path for a little while or we forget, that bhakti stays with us always, thus Krishna is with us always. Does that make sense?
Yes, absolutely. Thank you for that very beautiful answer. Many of us strive for that above all else because we know that is, no matter where we find ourselves, that is the most important thing.
In the totality of spirituality and philosophy, that is the highest state that one can attain and that one can aspire for, is to have that ever-present devotion to Krishna at all times and all places.
And with that, I think with your permission, we should probably end it there in the interest of your time because we do have some more questions, but they're probably more suited for a talk of their own. But yeah, so with your permission, unless you had some closing thoughts, we should probably end it there.
No, that sounds like a very good place to end. And again, thank you very much for all of the wonderful questions. These were truly great questions. But it's been wonderful doing this again with you. And as always, truly, truly wonderful, very good, philosophical, very well thought out questions. So it's always a pleasure.
Thank you very much, Sri Acharyaji. I know that means a lot for everyone who helped with the questions and myself. It's never, ever a burden at all to do these. These are one of my greatest pleasures to do these interviews and to just be involved in any way we can. It's always very easy to make time for them because nothing else comes close to the importance of them.
Very good. Well, thank you so much. And until we convene again at some point in the future, everyone please take very good care of yourselves, especially in these very interesting, crazy times that we're living in. Take very good care of yourselves, and I know we'll talk again in the future. And with
Thank
that, namaste. Jaya Shriman Narayana. Jaya Bhagavan Shri Krishna. Jaya Gurudeva. Sanatana Dharma Jayate. Victory to Sanatana Dharma. And everyone, please take care.
All the best. Thank you.